Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final session of this year's STM Frankfurt conference. For anyone who's new to this conference, the tradition is that the final panel is a panel of senior executives, and it is chaired by STM CEO. So this is the third time I have the opportunity and pleasure to chair this session and this discussion. It really is meant to just be a wandering discussion. This year, I am joined on stage from your far right, my left, Aaron Wood, who is Head of Product and Content Management at the American Psychological Association. We are also then joined by Daniel Ebneter, who is CEO at Karger. And then Sarah Tagan, who is Senior Vice President and Chief Publishing Officer at ACS, and is also, of course, STM Chair. And finally, Fred Fenter, who is Chief Executive Editor at Frontiers. So quite a mix of types of publisher, I would say, and to some extent, location as well. So I was thinking about what might we talk about? AI? Yes, we are going to reflect on AI. And I thought I would just start by asking each of our senior executives to just reflect a little bit about something that stood out from today that really caught your mind and that you're going to be chewing on for a while as you go home from this conference. Can I start with you, Fred?
Yes, thanks, Caroline. I think I'm going to try to make three short points. The three things that stuck out in my mind today. Already this morning, when Linda was presenting, she talked about using AI as a tool and using it with a certain amount of care. And I think that to sort of like maybe put some words in her mouth is that when a scientist uses some sort of AI tool that's been trained to a certain degree, that should always be taken with the critical view of a scientist. The scientist should understand what the limits are and should verify anything that they're able to extract from this from the model. And we heard again about training people. Again, that goes exactly in the same direction. We have to learn not only how to use the tools, but at the highest level, we have to maintain that critical attitude, that scientific critical attitude in terms of interpreting anything that comes out of the models. I think that just to keep it short, that was a leitmotif that kind of went through the day. The other word, I couldn't help count the number of times the word transparency was spoken today. It started immediately in the legal discussion, and I think that it was also articulated across a number of other areas. And the part of transparency that I thought was interesting is when Adam was talking about let's talk about scientific transparency and just the idea of articulating a hierarchy of content from retractions to preprints to gray literature, peer-reviewed papers, et cetera. I thought that was very, very interesting, and I do think that transparency leads to governance, and governance leads to trust, and I hope that we'll also have some time to talk about that in more detail. And then the last point, I think, is we talked a little bit about this gray area that exists between the extent to which people should be using AI as a tool in their writing, in their preparation of articles, et cetera. And I think that the word that really would have been very useful in that space is accountability. I think that if you're signing something as something that you endorse, then what you're doing is engaging your personal responsibility, your personal accountability around that output. And I think that thinking about it in those terms, I think would make it a little bit clearer about understanding where that line falls inside that gray zone.
Sarah, what stuck out for you today?
Yeah, so confession time, right? I come from a family of librarians. So Heather's panel with some of our librarian friends and researcher friends really stuck out to me. The thing that I was really considering is how do we instruct students? How do we instruct young researchers around the important role of AI in what they're doing. I loved Lisa's question to her students about how did you decide to use an AI tool in creating this assignment, right? And that demonstrates the understanding of the student about what AI is capable of doing and what it is not doing. And I think we heard that from Linda, we heard that from Mark, we heard that from Lisa about the lack of maybe critical thinking skills that students have today. And so there's something in here too about what can we as publishers do to help ensure the real depth of knowledge and understanding of the next generation of scholars, because if we don't, I think that leaves us in a really precarious position about what does scholarship kind of mean. I mean, we don't have to get into that kind of existential crisis here, but there's something in there for us, and I think that there's a role for us in collaborating with colleagues across academia in the libraries to really help think about what do they need to do to help instruct students.
Sarah, and I'll go on over to Daniel.
Thank you. I'm a non-native English speaker, as you will soon hear, and so it's part of my life to learn new English words and expressions every day, almost every day. And the one I took away from the keynote this morning was human recoil. That's something I hadn't encountered, but I think it made a lot of sense in what Linda says in terms of connecting it to the notion of boundaries not being properly set, of boundaries not being set at all, of boundaries being set too late. And that started me thinking on what we can reasonably expect to be able to achieve in terms of setting boundaries for AI as an industry or generally as stakeholders in the ecosystem, because I think it's fair to say that we have a long track record as a tech-driven societies of not putting up the guardrails in time, right? So we all know that usually on a street where people hurt themselves all the time, the guardrails will be put up once. A lot of people have hurt themselves over and over again, and it's not the other way around. It's changing, but that's not what we see. So it's a question of what can we reasonably do. The second thing is we are discussing content a lot, and I think that's quite natural for an STM meeting, and we are publishers, so we should talk about content, and we should be worried about how content is generated, how content is quality assured, how content is disseminated, how it's used in novel use cases. But I feel like we should also bear in mind that publishers exist because research is conducted in a certain way, right? And it's conducted in a certain framework that assigns certain roles to humans, not machines, in their professional life cycle. And we seem to believe that the flow of content coming out of that very well established and to some extent also inert framework will just continue coming. But I heard Mark Ratkovich describing his ChatGPT experiment and saying actually human brains are what make the difference between okay research and excellent research. But he also then gave an example of how he evaluated a body of work under the aspect of how it influences his own thinking, and he mentioned AI can't do that yet. So what if that changes, and do we have to prepare ourselves for a research ecosystem and a research framework that could fundamentally change under the influence of AI, not just publishing? And the third one is a more practical one. Roger Schoenfeld mentioned this publisher saying, as long as an AI doesn't produce a direct quote of my content, we're not too concerned, or something to the effect of that. And that's something I would probably support, because I see output from pure LLMs just as a game of probabilities, right? So, and even if an LLM were to produce a direct quote of an article published in a Karger journal or in a Karger book, I wouldn't be too worried. But the point I'm trying to make is that we should focus a lot on the value our content can bring in which use case. And I really like the question from the audience in the last panel about RAG versus LLM, which is an oversimplification to make because there are many terms, but I firmly believe that our content will provide much more value as a source of truth for referencing and for proving that something an LLM or a generative AI application produces is correct, rather than as training material for such models.
Thank you. And Aaron.
Yes, so I was particularly struck by how well prepared I think we are as an industry for what's going on, which may sound a little bit strange, but we heard a lot about current change, a lot about coming change, a lot about challenges that exist right now, and the challenges that will be coming very soon. But we already have a lot of things in place that set us up quite nicely. So the blurring between automation and AI, so we have already these processes that we can add to. We have these new tools at our disposal. We have new services and new service providers that have sprung up to help us with this. We also have a legal framework to rely on, which I know given the developments of the past year may not seem like that's the case, but we do, right? As we heard from several presenters, that we have copyright we can rely on, which is very strong, very robust, and we have privacy, and those really do form the base. So when you're confronted with this exceptionalism from LLMs, we really have a place to go to. And we have so many tools that we can use. Again, LLMs versus RAG, so on. But one theme that comes up almost every time AI is discussed is responsible AI. And there I think we need much more conversation because we don't have a common understanding of what that means as a society or as an industry. And it's questionable as to whether or not we in the publishing industry can create responsible AI because the technologies on which we're relying are completely opaque. We don't know anything about how they're trained. We know they are trained, but we don't know how. We don't know how their labeling is done. We don't know what approach they're using for the neural networks. We don't know how much energy they're using. So for us to be able to talk about responsible AI, we really need to be involved with the overall AI.
There were a number of things I think that we could pick up on. So why don't we dig a little bit into what you just said, Aaron, about responsible AI? Because one of the things as the STM policy advocacy stakeholder engagement team is that we're really trying to think about how do we insert that there needs to be almost a recognition. If you're going to train, among other things, scientific content, scholarly content, then you need to understand the responsibility of that, because this is serious stuff. And so how do we start to insert, for example, in definitions around responsible AI, also this concept of you should be thinking that we're kind of the standard bearer in terms of a system that can correct itself, that should be transparent anyway, et cetera, et cetera. There are some definitions out there that are including some of that in there. But I'm just wondering, is there anything that you have thoughts on about what might we be trying in terms of a definition around that responsible? What might we add, or as scholarly publishers, should we be advocating for in those definitions?
I think it's the same thing that the public is asking for. It's the same thing that think tanks are asking for. It's transparency. And what exactly that means is hard to say. But, I mean, how could we take a model that has Reddit posts alongside scholarly articles, alongside retracted scholarly articles, all treated more or less the same way, and say, yes, this is responsible? We can't. We need to be involved. We need to be involved as disciplines in what's going on right now in governance. And we also need to be involved as...
jump in.
Yeah, so I'd just like to add to that. I think a key word in this space is, it's come up a couple of times, is stewardship. And I think as publishers, we have a responsibility to make sure that we're getting the right content into the models in a responsible way, and that we're also curating the content to make sure that retractions, unfortunate false statements are not being propagated through the entire database. And again, it goes a little bit back to the idea of governance. I'm wondering whether, as publishers, as an industry, as a community, whether we should be thinking about conducting some kinds of audits to make sure that there is a certain level of stability and veracity behind the content that's in these models. But I think that from my point of view, the key word is stewardship. As publishers, we have this responsibility as being stewards, and I think we take it from that angle. It might also help us to decide what the right actions might be moving forward.
I wonder if there's also some more activist kind of posture that we could take, because absolutely stewardship and ensuring that the most up-to-date version is out there and what models are trained on, great. But I wonder if in thinking about licenses that we might negotiate with the LLMs, I'm thinking about a comment, Roy, that you made earlier about the power of the purse strings. What are the terms that we can put in agreements with the AI companies to say, what are your LC analysis look like? You know, what are your ideals about updating content? What standards are we going to hold you to about updating content? What's the weighting that you put on our content versus Reddit or gray literature or preprints, right? I don't think that we have to be bystanders in this. I think we can be a lot more active, and we really need to.
I would also say it's very important to explain to stakeholders how we see the world and why we think it makes sense to see the world the way we see it, because across stakeholders, and that's also something I think we can take away from the keynote this morning. Even if you're out there to kill each other, you can still agree on a certain fundamental principle, right? And that's probably the most extreme example, because there is no black and white in the definition of responsibility. Each of us will have different concepts of drinking responsibly, driving responsibly, whatever. So we have to explain this, because I believe that any kind of building guardrails and sticking to guardrails requires a joint definition of what is good and what is bad, and that's probably not easy to achieve. Looking at the discussion, authors telling us, oh, but this big tech is doing bad things with the content, where we think, oh, that's just another use that makes sense if it's fairly compensated and reference of the work of those people.
Whoops, hello. Sarah, I want to say too, I'm really glad that you had that comment, because so my personal view is that it's been really, really important that we have publishers who have started to land licensing agreements, because that's put a stake in the ground, and together with some of the collective licensing agencies as well, that this is licensable content. And I think that's important for the publishers, and it's not just about, okay, some additional income, but it really is also, I think, on behalf of authors. So we start to at least put that stake in the ground that you've got to come and have a discussion. So I do wonder, is the next phase now, if we truly are taking seriously our stewardship of the scientific scholarly record, we're thinking of the interests of scholars and some of the feedback that we're starting to hear from them, that it almost behooves us to start thinking then, okay, how do we act as ethical players in those negotiations, let's say, in this next round. But yet I think it's been very important to get that stake in the ground.
Yeah, I think like on the author front, and Daniel, this is maybe where I disagree with you a little bit. So much of scholarship is built on what's come before, right? And the attribution of scholarship is really important to researchers. It's how they build their careers. I mean, there's lineage in science. There's what discoveries came before you, and I want to make sure that my researchers, when their content is synthesized in an answer from an LLM, that they get the attribution that they deserve. There are a lot of people hours that went into that research. Maybe it'll be robot hours now, AI robots, but there's intellectual capital there that is so important for the advancement of a researcher. So I really think that the transparency about where content came from and the attribution and links back to our content is really going to serve us well.
Yeah, of course. And I think I have to
Formulating your thoughts.
I have to disagree with you saying we disagree, because I wasn't advocating in any way that Gen A applications should be free to quote our content word by word. I just said it can accidentally happen based on my understanding of how LLM works, and then probably there's not much you can do about it. But and it goes back to the point I was also making, that we should focus on the use cases that are providing exactly that. Because look at Cargo, we're a small publisher. Our corpus of articles is 500,000, the complete one, not yearly like others, the complete one since we were established in 1890. So what difference will that corpus make in the training of the next generation of ChatGPT? Probably none, right? I have to be very reasonable here. Probably none. But if it helps validating things an LLM produces and giving people that are still being credited as the bearers of responsibility, as the people we trust, we know that what they have researched is great stuff. If our content can serve in such applications to do that, that is probably the ideal case.
I'd just like to add that I think that the use of LLMs is going to become a major channel for scientific the dissemination of scientific content in general. And I think we have to recognize that may actually become one of the most important way that people will actually become content with content. And again, the attribution aspect is extremely important. It's that community recognition is central to what a researcher is looking for in this entire publishing cycle. I would say that if we want researchers to participate, they will see the huge advantages of the dissemination of their work through through this channel, where people will discover their work in unexpected ways. But they will not participate in the project at all if they do not see some of the very basic things that they need to see from their publisher.
Again, I think we have to explain that there might be, in the context or in the world of AI, more attractive use cases than accessing our content through a platform. And I think that's especially true in corporate environments. I was having a very interesting discussion in the last coffee break. And Basel is home of Roche and Novartis, so I will mention them, Basel, where Cargo resides. So, of course, they will today have access licenses to our content. They will consume them through our own portals. They will consume them through a licensing agency. These are basically the two options. But looking at the researcher inside such a corporate where there is a lot of proprietary secret information involved as well, it's much more attractive to have our content as an additional source of truth in an internal system that also knows everything about the research pipelines in Roche or Novartis on a given day, and consult this system rather than going on our platform where the whole translation of the internal knowledge into the query on our platform has to happen in the head of this person. So there is very clearly a case to make for better ways of using our content than through the traditional channels, using AI.
Well, I think we have the beginning of the first recommendation in respect to responsible AI, and it's only a small part of it, but I think we can all agree that for any content, whether it's open access, whether it's got CC BY, CC BY NCND, or it's it's not open access, that attribution is essential. So that seems like something that everybody can probably agree on, including researchers. Do we include that in our licenses?
And I would just point out too that I think attribution is important, not just because of citations, but because this is about science. Scholarship is a conversation. And yes, we want that to also get out to others who can apply that, but it's really important to be having that conversation with your colleagues, right? And so I think there's something in that with the attribution that's actually really like almost like a first principle. Is like, how do we actually help facilitate that conversation? And in part that's taken place through citing and attribution so that I can follow the trail and transparency of how you arrived at this idea or made this connection in your thinking. And I suppose that's the bit I'm also thinking, like, with this new additive feature in this space, you know, what is our role as publishers to ensure that something that maybe I'm off, but I think that this is something that's fundamental to science and scholarship is that conversation that we're having. We're building, as you said, Sarah, on what came before us, either building on it or disproving it or, you know, to move things forward. We're not just trying to put more information out there, we're actually trying to get closer to more and more accurate descriptions of what the world is like, right? So yeah, I'm just curious, how do we maintain that? Or do we even try? Is that someone else's job? I've stunned you all. I'm asking the hard questions.
Executives
yeah,
are silent. That's a first. You know, I'm kind of struck by a comment Pascal made earlier about the different answers you get depending upon your jurisdiction, probably what's legally allowed, what is your cookie history, I'm sure, you know, all of these other pieces. And so then, gosh, in helping scholarship, it scares me a lot to say the source of truth that a researcher has access to is dependent on their connection. Yeah, kind of really gives me a lot of heartburn. And maybe that's not so different from today as to who's got access to my content based on subscriptions or open access or speed of connection or whatever. But I think we can't kid ourselves then that it is a panacea to have AI tools at our disposal to help researchers if they aren't being equitably distributed, I guess. I don't think that really gets at your question.
And
it's a
to say too,
tangent.
I think too, a lot of our commenting today, I mean, we're thinking about ChatGPT and these large models that have just trained on everything, general all-purpose kind of thing, right? I would imagine we're going to move into another phase of much more specialized, much more, you know, poised to work in certain spaces that will be much more quality in, quality out, as opposed to just any old thing in and therefore, you know, crapshoot out. So maybe this is where we're kind of moving to, and maybe there's something, a role that publishers can play, and also trying to shepherd in that, in working with those that have that serious interest in that next phase. Erin, you're in this technology space, and I know you contribute to our STM trends every year as well. How do you is there a next phase, do you think, coming, or where do you think this might be going?
Well, there's a lot of talk about RAG and the application of that at discipline level, or potentially across disciplines that are related, and how that might work with the large language models. But the problem there is there's a lot of pushback within the LLM providers right now, because their solution is to do more intensive training, more intensive chain of thought approaches, more intensive agentic design. What is it? Just yesterday, like just the speed of the change, OpenAI announced yesterday its agentic framework. It's got a name. I don't remember what the name is, but there's part of the community is looking for these smaller data sets to help answer things more authoritatively in a more controlled fashion. But other part of the community is looking at keep the mystique and use more energy and take a different approach to it so you can continue to control it. So it feels like just an issue of control, which then becomes an issue of governance, which is an issue of regulation. And I feel very strongly that we don't have the right people at the table right now on the regulatory side. Big tech is there, governments are there, intergovernmental agencies are there, some think tanks are there, but we're not there. And the science disciplines are not really there either.
We're trying to be there. You just need to know that even though we are cooperating with the entire creative sector, but compared to tech, we're like this big in our resourcing, right? So yeah, it is a kind of David and Goliath situation. Yeah.
Well, we're trying to be there in behavioral science and psychology as well. It's difficult, but if you look at what's being reported from the agencies that are involved in regulation, they mention things like evidence-based approaches. They mention science panels. They mention that they really want involvement from social sciences and the creative community. So the window is there. It's just good at figuring out how to get into it.
Fred, I saw previously you were going to jump in with a comment. Do you remember what that was?
Yeah, I mean, the one comment I was going to jump in, I was just going to mention the fact that I think that in the not too distant future, people will be using these tools in a very curated, focused way, and scientists will start their day by asking the simple question, Chad, which are the 5 papers, you know me, you know my interests, which are the 5 papers published over the last 2 weeks that you think I should know about, and so I think that this is what I was talking about as a channel of discovery and dissemination, and I think some of the chats I played with actually already do a pretty good job in that direction. They're not particularly up to date. But when the resources are put into those features or products, I think it will become part of the way science is research questions are approached at the very beginning of every research project.
I think there's a bit to add there too. Like, yes, I would love to see like, hey, summarize like what I should be reading. Give me some summarization of 5 articles. And give me something a little random. It gets at what Linda was saying before. Like, I went and found the volume on the stacks, but it was also about like, what are the 10 other books that were around it, right? Like when I was in graduate school, yes, I went and looked up various papers and printed copies of journals. And you got better ideas when you scan the stuff that was before and after. You're like, huh, well, that's interesting, right? And I think that in our directed world, that bit of serendipity has been missing for a long time. And I think it impacts the creativity, frankly, of research globally. And so if we can bring back some of that too, like the I feel lucky kind of button, yeah, would be great.
No, I agree 100%. And I think what I think is that scientists will always understand what the boundaries are in terms of the effectiveness of the tools that they work with. And I think that they will always be critical about the information that they're getting from any source. So they'll always want to see. They'll go right. This is too good to believe. So I'm going to go and figure out whether it's actually true or not. What worries me a little bit more is about the impact as it unfolds, for example, in the policy space, where all of a sudden you have policy decisions that need to be made around the climate crisis, around the health crisis, and then you have these models that are trained with large amounts of scientific information, and you really have no way at all of knowing whether the policy people who might be using this as a source of insight are actually using that scientific critical spirit when they actually read the outcomes.
Just whilst we're pausing for a moment, it occurs to me too that we could have done a quick question. I just want, for the record, I think we're all nonetheless want to lean into AI. It's just we're trying to think critically about some of those unintended consequences so that we don't find ourselves in a really uncomfortable place. Uncomfortable being an understatement, because we could see very serious consequences if we don't think through things, as Linda was pointing out to us this morning. Agree? Yes? Yeah, okay. Just for the record, because it could sound like we're being really overly negative up here. Great. And so I wanted to pick up on stewardship, and the word accountability has come up a few times today. And I very much like that word accountability, because I think that one of the things, it's a word I use when I'm trying to discuss with stakeholders about why do we care about the work that publishers do? And it's because not only, for example, are you managing a peer review process and ensuring that it's organized and that they're overseeing that process, but truly taking accountability. There are people in that process who are responsible for the thing they're going to do, the editor, the reviewer, but you take accountability for the overall end result of that. And if something's gone wrong, they don't go to the reviewer, they don't go to the editor, they, ultimately it lands on your desk, right? And you take the consequences and deal with that. And sometimes there's honest mistakes, and I think it's important to say, and then there are other times that there aren't. And also that we're correcting that in perpetuity. But I'd like to pick up then, this accountability has been talked about a bit today in this AI context. What do we remain accountable for? Or are there other things that you would articulate that we as publishers have been holding ourselves accountable for? And I might start with you, Fred, because I know you and I were having a bit of this conversation already in the break.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a little bit, go back to a little bit what I was saying in the past about the concept of stewardship. I think it's extremely important that we as publishers recognize our responsibility in this space, and I think we need also to show that the validation by the peer review process, by the various stages of quality control, has a real added value, and that added value is something which really needs to be leveraged by these models.
Daniel, you looked like you had some thoughts on that as well.
I firmly believe we need to maintain the standards, and we can trust on or we can be proud of the standards that we have established. Now, I'm asking myself, the tech firms, or generally the people we think might do bad things, are they really questioning our accountability? No, I think a RAG system that uses our content as a source of truth massively benefits from us doing all that work, right? But of course, a generic LLM that happens to produce the abstract of a Karger article will, and not attribute it, will not honor that. But there are technical reasons for that, right? And I also think, based on what Fred, or answering to what Fred says, the more we expect Gen AI applications to serve a purpose of being a search engine pointing us to interesting and trusted things, the more these systems will have to move away from the initial approach of just knowing that one word might appear in a text 17 words down the road from another one with a probability of X, right? But that's what these systems are currently doing. So I see the value of our content in the systems, but we also have maybe to shift our definitions of what we see as attribution, for example, because attribution is key to us being able to demonstrate what we are doing.
But you would agree, though, that if those 17 words are sort of a very interesting, provocative statement, that the reader might want to understand where those 17 words came from. And so I think that's the bit about attribution. You should be able to ask the question. So where did you get this statement from?
Yes, but the systems are not built to give you these 17 words because they found them somewhere, and I think that's the core of the problem, right? Attribution in a pure LLM context is not that easy, because I'm not giving the very advanced and sophisticated LLM systems credit here, but imagine a monkey typing away randomly on a typewriter, and it could be that one day, if Hamlet was still under copyright, the monkey types a scene of Hamlet, right? Would it be a reasonable ask for the monkey also typing, by the way, this is from Shakespeare at the bottom? And as you know, it's very obvious that this is not the case. So we have to understand the way LLMs work. And if you want we have to understand how RAGs work. I think RAGs are an excellent way of bringing our authoritative content and all the work we do into the picture right now. But again, if we want LLMs to be able to say these 17 words, by the way, I took from a Karger paper, then they will have to work differently than today, and they may. But,
Sorry. So let me move to a new topic in all of this. And I think we've been talking a little bit about what might STM be able to support, or other trade associations be able to support publishers and other member organizations with during this time. And I think you started already touching on this, Aaron, with like, what I take from what you said is, try and start this discourse, try and think about what does it mean responsible AI. What more would you be looking to us to do? And I have to add, we are trying to do things already, but I'm always interested to hear what more is needed.
Well, I mean, I kind of just have the two areas that to me are just so important right now, which is helping to understand the extent to which we can define responsible AI within our space, with RAG models, without RAG models, and also just the advocacy, which is very needed. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's STM that does it. It could be STM jointly with somebody else. So, much like the Article 4 group worked directly with other organizations in the creative space, as well as with the W3C. I mean, I think it's very important that we look a little bit beyond where we typically have, and really look to get into the spaces where the LLM providers are operating, as opposed to operating within our space and hoping to bring them in.
Daniel, please.
I would see an opportunity in joining forces to demonstrate that we understand what these companies or the players out there want to do with our content and how we can help them achieve their goals, right? Maybe it's about changing the narrative a little bit from saying, oh, but we as publishers, we want to make sure our content is used responsibly, and that has a notion of limiting what they can do. But there's probably no reason to be so defensive in the narrative, because if we understand those systems properly, and there are a lot of people in our companies that do much better than we do, then I think we just have to establish us as an industry and also the individual company as valuable counterparts to these companies, because there is so much our content can do to help them produce better systems at the end of the day for the researcher or for the general public.
So really that articulating the value proposition of actually working with us rather than kind of ignoring us and just trying to get a
more use case based approach, right? Saying, oh, we understand you want to achieve this. We understand your LLM is hallucinating and you need a source of truth to maybe even shape the prompt better, and telling the LLM, by the way, if you do your magic, you should assume this and this and this to be true, and that's what RAG systems do. There is a lot of potential just to explain what we bring to the table, right? I don't really see us limiting what they do, because I don't think they're in fundamental disrespect of our work. The question is more, are they allowed to use our content in a certain way, or are ways they're using our content to be seen as infringement of copyright or not? And the debate is around that. I don't think the debate is around acknowledging the work we are doing and all the qualities that come with content that is published by a scholarly publisher.
So I think I also hear in that there's articulating the value proposition of working with us, but there's equally some education of, understand what it is that we are, that's behind that content that you're scraping, the work that's gone into it, that might help you to understand the importance of it and yeah, what you're also picking up. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Can I give an example to illustrate that? You mentioned some backlash by researchers in the face of some big deals that have been done between publishers and big tech. So I think the researchers' concern is attribution for sure, but it's also a concern that their authoritative work is not being spit out by an LLM next to absolute rubbish, right? And that's an interest these companies have as well. You know, the builders of those systems have as well. So we should be able to bring those views together.
I think to go beyond that a little bit, thinking about the awesome conversations that we've had today, we could use more researcher voices, more scholar voices in this conversation. We could use the policy voices in this conversation. And the thing that I keep thinking about was like the Asilomar conferences of the early 1970s at the dawn of molecular biology, when that group of scholars came together and said, we're going to figure out how to police ourselves here before like the regulators come in and do that. And I wonder if there is something here that trade associations can do to help us convene those correct groups of people, because our interests are really aligned. And I'd like to do it on our own before someone comes in and imposes on us some cudgel probably way of doing it, right? So I think that there's opportunity for some roundtables convened by the trade associations that says, let's get this right, folks.
I like that. Sounds like we're off to Silicon Valley here.
Yeah. And I'll just add something which is probably a little bit more pragmatic, and that's the work that can be done together in this community in terms of research integrity. And I think the real problem in that space is, of course, that it's an industry-wide issue that none of us are ever going to be able to solve on our own. You know, we regularly see the papers that we desk reject for very questionable practices being published at another publisher a very short time afterwards. There's no reason that these signals around these different types of aspects cannot be shared to some extent, and at least that we are able to work together in terms of our own experiences, the tools that we've developed, and I think really collaborating at this level, we will see an entirely different landscape within 18 to 24 months if we do this correctly.
Thank you. I thought with that, we could open up to the floor if there's any questions that anyone would like to pose to our executive panel today.
Nico Gontrov, Signals now. Sarah, I was really intrigued by what you said, because some of my best friend from the age of 7 is a professor, and most of my friends are in academia. And this diminution in critical thinking is a real issue. And not that publishers need to solve every problem, but I'm wondering if there isn't some kind of criteria for explaining how you used AI and explaining why your findings are not the result of AI, right? Maybe there's something in terms of aims and scope or editorial best practice that publishers could do to both identify the role of AI and then make the authors go that extra step further instead of relying on it for their own conclusions. But again, I don't know, just like attribution, right, Daniel, you're right, attribution is pretty difficult. If you're talking about a concept, how do you attribute a concept to a particular author? And I don't know exactly what the workings for this are, but publishers, I think, are in a powerful position to force researchers and authors to distinguish between their critical thinking and the contribution of AI. But I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think kind of what you're outlining feels a lot like credit for AI, right? You know, what role did AI play in creation of this piece of work, right? And probably that gets a lot more complicated, and I haven't thought hard about that. I also want to make sure that if we require something like that of authors, we also put the tools in their hands to get them to be able to be successful at using AI early on. So there's the educational component too that we should be thinking about.
And I also think there's the attribution, that the responsibility that that the person accepts responsibility for what they're putting their signature on is a very, very big part of that picture.
And just to note that our STM Standards and Technology Committee is, of course, working on some standard terminology for declaring use of AI, both in preparing the manuscript and I believe also through the research process. So that's something that we do have in train, which is not the full story of what you're asking, but I think perhaps a piece of it.
Thank you. So there's a lot of discussion about what the future might look like in these cases. How do we get there? And I want to ask specifically, as senior leaders of your organizations, are you actively building expertise within your organization, meaning hiring data scientists, recruiting, trying to retain them within the organization? Are you looking at a different strategy for accessing this kind of expertise? What's your plan, strategic plan for leveraging these technologies going forward to this vision?
That's a bit interesting. We talked a bit last year too about how hiring was shifting, different types of roles that are emerging in the sector. Are you seeing new roles emerging, or is that anything anyone can divulge at this point?
I can talk from a little bit of a different angle. The American Psychological Association produces two different surveys in the US each year to the public. One is on stress in America and the other is on work in America. And the recent Work in America study or survey had questions about AI in it. And what we saw with the survey is that there's a distinct difference between how upper and middle management view AI as opposed to frontline workers. So frontline workers are much more afraid of being replaced, and they are much less confident that they will be retrained. So as a result of the findings of that survey, but also just generally the way that the APA tends to approach things, is that we are looking to build the expertise from within through training, which is complicated, and it requires a lot of thought around the upskilling, but it addresses two things at once. It's the ethical side and then also the building of the expertise.
I can say that, as Marie kind of suggested during her presentation, I think it's safe to say that every role and every process at Frontiers right now is being re-engineered, reconsidered in this context of gaining effectiveness and efficiency through the use of AI. And these are largely sort of the internal processes. It's not about LLMs. It's about having an editorial process from submission through dissemination, which is more effective and efficient, and benefiting from all the things that these algorithms do well in terms of pattern recognition, content classification, recommender systems, this sort of thing, and all of that can be put to very good use practically to every single employee in the company. So yes, there's a huge effort to make sure that we move in that direction.
Yeah, hi. I wanted to go back a bit, in light of the discussions on attribution and, the very valid point that a monkey sitting there could write Hamlet. Obviously, this is happening with AI, like with the amount of generated content or the questions being asked. What is generated is likely to be very similar, if not exactly the same as something that has been published right now. Do we have, within the publishing industry, the scholarly publishing industry, do we have to reconsider the concept of plagiarism? This is something, we're wondering at COPE, are we in the kind of post-plagiarism era where we have to redefine what is plagiarism and what are the situations that do require attribution or not?
We're also sort of regressing towards the mean in terms of language, right? And what does that mean, right? I mean, LLMs, there are words, right, that you can come up with that look like they're LLM generated. And so I guess maybe what does that mean about consumption of our content in addition to how it's written, and how much more should we be focusing on the human consumption versus the machine consumption and recapitulation of our information? I don't know the answer there, but there's something.
Yeah, I think the use case perspective kicks in here, right? So I would say in an early generation of ChatGPT, like the monkey, if it coincidentally, almost stochastically coincidentally produced a piece of content, then attribution would have been very difficult, right? But then probably a person would sit in front of the system just trying to generate a text, right? But if we're moving to that use case of people using LLMs or Gen AI applications in general as discovery tools, and with an expectation that they give them text that is pre-existing, and the 17 words it spits out are actually 17 words that can be found in an authoritative source, then there is use of our content, there is reproduction of our content, and then we should have the discussion on that basis. Then the content is reproduced, and we deserve not only attribution, we deserve copyrights to be honored, and many of our other rights and our authors' rights to be honored. But it depends on the use case and the expectation.
Thanks a lot, Chris Graff at the back. From Springer Nature. I think I heard you right, Fred, when you said that we could fix something in 18 to 24 months if we did a bunch of collaboration. I think that you were referring to fixing the research integrity type problems.
Yeah.
I think you said we can fix this research integrity stuff if we get together in 18 to 24 months. And I want to ask you what that kind of collaboration would look like from your point of view.
Well, first of all, I think it's also in the context of benefiting from the AI tools that can understand the types of patterns that develop across the articles that are being submitted. Look, I'm not exactly sure what that collaboration would look like. I'm not even exactly sure to what extent that type of collaboration would even be legal. I think it would, under GDPR, there are limitations in terms of what types of metadata can be exchanged from authors who have not agreed to have that exchange of metadata. But I do feel that the technology is there, and if we actually can get adequate coordination around that technology, working together, we can make huge inroads and really have, as I said, a very, very different landscape, publishing landscape, in a relatively short window of time.
Aaron, did you have something on that?
Well, I fear I might veer it in a different direction altogether, but yeah, we're well positioned to do this. We have the collaborations and the trade industries, trade associations to help us along as well. And the tools are there. However, it introduces new problems when we pursue that line of thinking, and that has a lot to do with human behavior. So there's a fair amount of research has gone into, both in the business literature in respect to marketing and digital behavior, and also in the behavioral sciences, that our perception of technologies can be varied or homogeneous. So we tend to look at people and we consider it as a varied aspect. But when we look at technologies like AI, we don't do that. We look at it as a very much with a perception of, it's very homogeneous. We paint the brush the same for all of it. So it's either distrust or overtrust. So we have to be very careful about the overtrust piece in developing and deploying these tools, because you can get into the situation where you're trusting the technology from a general level, which makes it such that you're doing it an individual application or tool. You need that critical thinking, right? You need to bring it in as much as you can, but the tendency is not to do that, which means that there's a high probability that we'll believe in the semi-hallucinations that come out of it, as well as the false positives that it identifies.
Sorry, if I may, I was
Hello, Chris.
imagining that somebody might have mentioned the STM Integrity Hub as the place for the collaboration that you're just referring to.
I thought you might be planting a seed
I
of
meant
such.
I meant to mention it.
Thank you.
If I didn't, it was an oversight. Sorry.
Great job. Thank you.
But to your point with the some human factors in there, though, Aaron. I mean, what we also know with the Integrity Hub is really it's ready to go, and now it's about the populating it. And so we know that some of our some members, because of size, say we know that once we start using it, we've got to be able to have the capacity, person-wise, people-wise, to actually handle the outputs of what are going to come our way that we need to review as humans. But equally, I know some of our larger members probably have to work through. You have societies, you have editors, and all these people that we've also got to work through to get that content on, which unfortunately, the will is there, but sometimes the practicalities of human behavior can slow things down a bit, it seems. Thank you. There's been a lot to digest today, I would say. And certainly as leading STM, I feel like some of this last part in particular of, what is it that we can do to help, we'll be taking back with us and thinking very deeply about that. But I also feel like this conversation is certainly going to help us in terms of the policy and advocacy work we do and the work we do with stakeholder communities to really try and articulate what we are seeing as the opportunities and those challenges that we need to face. And to Lisa Hinchliff's point, we have seen these, I've been thinking about this too, we keep seeing these new disruptions. And this one is a bit different because it's the first time, as I've been reading Harare's book, Nexus, it's the first time you can have systems that are just computers talking to computers. So we've got to be really careful about that human factor and that we don't exclude ourselves out of this. But I think what is really great about these moments in time is that they really push us to think deeply about what's really important here. Like what's really the most essential thing? What's really true about our role that will also be true as we move through this transition, right? And that, let's not lose that core of what's really important. And I think that's why for us, that trusted research is going to have to be our North Star and continue to be, and the thing by which we measure everything we're doing. Does this lead to trusted research, or will it somehow impede that or get in the way of us helping to communicate trusted research? I'm going to be thanking my panel in just a moment, but please don't jump up yet because then I have just a few thank yous, but I promise you the drinks are only a few minutes away. But first, please, can you join me in thanking our panel this afternoon?